Day 59 to 3:28 p.m. South District, Bay City Settlement, Para plus or minus Aqua City, Metro Manila. The swarm of flying infected outside the settlement took the attention of almost everyone inside the South District. They already thought that the combined forces of the military and the survivors already killed them all. It was fortunate that the infected being thrown over the walls were lessened considerably. If not, their attention being split could cause fatal consequences. They were thankful that these infected did not seem to have the aim to attack the settlement. At least, not currently. It was because the army of flying hybrid infected was entangled with two winged and armored figures. The battle in the sky was intense that those were free and those that were positioned in relatively safer areas could not help but watch. Furthermore, the display of the armored figures dealing with the flying infected army and the gigantic flying infected left everyone in awe. From the sky, the corpses of the flying infected fell one by one. When the black armored figure kicked the gigantic infected into the building, everyone watching yelled and cheered. Slowly, their fear started to transform into hope. The two people in the sky were dealing with the army of flying infected on their own. Just what were they doing below? Why were they struggling with such measly ground lurking and almost incapacitated infected? Their blood began to boil. The exhilarating battle in the sky started to affect their minds and hearts. R-A-H-H-H-H. Who was it that shouted? Where did that shout filled with vigor and fighting intent came from? No one knew the answers to those questions, but one thing was for sure. That shout started it. Coming out from their hiding spots, the scared survivors took what they could use as weapons. Some picked up the guns of the fallen soldiers and survivors from the ground. The scene immediately became chaotic. Nevertheless, they were all now working for a single goal. As the first ones came out, the others started to follow. Like how being infected was highly contagious, the current vigor everyone had was the same. They only had one place to call home now. Living here might be hard and everyone was feeding off from the hands of the military. Nevertheless, they had nowhere else to go. Once this place fell, a lot of them would fall together with it. Those could be their families, their friends, their lovers, or someone they just knew. Those things, they wanted to prevent it from happening. Hiding behind others would not do to. They had to step forward by themselves. Roar. The familiar roar was heard as they saw the rumored dragon. It was the dragon that helped to thwart a lot of the first flying infected. As they saw the dragon join the fray once more, their hearts felt even more elated. Not only the dragon but another group of combatants could also be seen rushing towards the southern walls. They were no other than the rest of the group of Team Fairy. There was even the huge woman with tentacles with them that was already shooting lasers at the flying horde as she slithered forward. The morale of the people inside the settlement rose rapidly. They charged towards every infected they saw and mobbed them to death. The scared people started to forget the feeling of fear they had before. Day 59 to 3:29 p.m. North District, Bay City Settlement, Pasay City, Metro Manila. On contrary to the situation in the South District, the North District was struggling. It was because, in this place, only the ones affiliated with the military, the VIPs and government were settled. The unity was almost non-existent as most the politicians and businessmen kept their hired people around them to protect them. As such, the hands needed here was not enough. R-A-H-H-H-H. Those that were living close to the South District suddenly heard loud cheering and vigorous shouting. When they checked, they saw the positive chaos happening at the South District. At the government officials' residences, many among the stationed private soldiers saw the same commotion. They saw how the should-be non-combatants vigorously fought. Inside the residence of a congressman, some of the hired mutators watched the scene from the window. What idiots! They could just hide and wait it out till the military sort everything out. The captain of the group ridiculed. He did not notice that the young ones of their group were looking at him sternly. Looking back at the people in the South District, one of the young ones could not help it anymore. Nils, where are you going? The captain asked as he saw the young man started to walk towards the door. Hearing their captain's stern voice, the young man stopped. Nevertheless, he did not want to face their captain anymore. "Sorry, Captain. I am not a cold and heartless bastard like you." The young man then removed the badge that indicated his group and threw it on the floor. "Nils. What are you?" The captain did not finish what he was about to shout as he became speechless. 3 more men followed behind Nils and threw their badges on the floor. "Everyone, are you sure about this?" Nils asked the others that followed behind him. "Well, there's use asking that now, right?" One of them smirked. With that, the group of hot-blooded young men stormed the streets, killing every infected they saw. They were not the only ones. There were others. Their numbers may not be too many. Their participation slowly turned the tide in the North District. At the northern walls, Nia and Alan finally revealed themselves to the public. Furthermore, they were fighting alongside the young Dryad and her Spriggan little brother. The 4 were busy fighting the infected that made it to the walls while also maintaining the situation as best as they could. Then, they heard the commotion inside the North District. The private army hired by the government officials and the VIPs joined the fray. Just what in the world is going on? Not only the 4 of them but the soldiers and other mutators started to wonder. Then, boom! From where they stood, they heard a loud sound. The source of the sound could not be told whether it was an explosion or not. Nevertheless, it was not hard to see where it came from. As they could not see it clearly, Emika and Mikio used their abilities to create a rampart, raise them high with Nia and Alan. It was quite dangerous, but they wanted to see what was happening. There, they finally witnessed dust and debris scattered from far away as they saw the condominium complex of Bayview crumbling into pieces. Day 59 to 3:31 p.m. Airspace, Baclaran, para plus or minus Aqua City, Metro Manila. Mark charged downward, leaving May up in the sky. He was aiming for the gigantic infected below. His wings created shockwaves as it flapped, however, it was not enough. The veins in his body glowed along with his eyes. Adding adrenaline to the mix which he circulated all over his body, blood started to seep out of them and transformed. As his whole body transformed, his predatorial instinct started to awaken. Nevertheless, it was still not enough. As such, he disappeared into a puff of smoke and entered his created subspace. Inside that subspace that could double or even triple his speed, he continued to charge downward. The moment he exited the subspace, he was moving even faster. Still, he felt that it was not enough. Once, twice, thrice. He disappeared and reappeared repeatedly. Each interval was shorter as he gained several times more speed. There was nothing that could be seen anymore from him but a slight black blur. Mark could not hear anything anymore. The resistance from the wind started to make him feel burning. His skin started to become reddish. Nevertheless, he was not stopping. He even accelerated further, as they said. Go even further beyond. The giant then stopped midair. It seemed that its instincts told it how dangerous it was to continue upwards. It tried to fly away, leaving its comrades and defying the will of their king below them. However, it was already late. Plus ultra, a shout was heard. Bomb MMM. The giant lost stability in the air as it felt a heavy impact on its back which even dented his metallic wings and skin. And it did not end there. Swoom. Mark's wings flapped faster and started to push the giant down along with him. They traveled at a speed that their figures could not be seen clearly. And then, Mark looked at the blurry surroundings and saw a glimpse of the top of the building where the king type resided. He smiled despite the pain he was feeling in his creaking body. Metallic scales fluttered in the surroundings, creating an effect of a meteor falling. Boom. Mark and the giant crashed onto the roof of the condominium complex like a meteor. Rooftop, 20th floor, 19th floor. Floor by floor, Mark and the giant created holes on the floors of the building. Until the two crashed onto the ground floor, creating a large crater. It had dents on its skin, but the giant was intact. At least in the outside. Inside its skin, everything already turned into mush. Mark, on the other hand, felt pain all over his body. Nevertheless, it was not the time to bother with it. He grabbed the lifeless giant by its neck and vanished into a puff of smoke one last time. They left the crater empty and made it out as the whole building started to collapse. Gray smoke crated from falling debris and scattered dust covered the area. The collapse was rather strong as it created a small tremor that affected the nearby buildings. Outside the vicinity of the collapse, the black smoke waved away and Mark appeared. He threw the giant on the ground and looked behind him. There, a figure clad in black aura came out of the cloud of dust looking at Mark with sinister eyes. It was no other than the king type. Mark smiled. His transformation was not undone by the pain he was feeling. Instead, the pain started to stimulate his predatory senses further. He was in pain. He wanted to release the pain in his body. Boom. Boom. Two explosive sounds were heard. Mark disappeared from his spot as he kicked the ground. Nevertheless, the king type seemed to have the same idea. Bam! The fists of the two clashed. Unfortunately, the king type was at a disadvantage. It was not injured, but it was pushed backward and slid its feet on the ground. Unlike normal infected, it was sure steady on its feet. Nevertheless, it was not the real attack. He appeared to the side of the king type, his eyes glaring red and his mouth shaped like a crescent moon with his smile. A kick was unleashed on its stomach. Boom! The king type flew backward for about a dozen meters before crashing onto another building, causing glass and pieces of furniture to fly around. Mark then landed. He walked towards the building with deep breaths. Control, that was what he needed. He wanted to capture this infected. In the least, he wanted to know who was the queen this guy was looking for. If he lost control, he would probably end up killing it. He looked above and saw Chaflar swooping towards May to let her ride on its back. The lasers also kept firing, which meant that Amy was already by the South District to help. As the remaining flying infected were being dealt with, the only one left was the king type. Nevertheless, the fight was not over yet. Gra-ah-ah-ah-ah-ah-ah. A loud roar came from the building and a figure came out. Of course, it was the king type, who was not only unscathed, it was even emitting a more dangerous aura. Throb. Throb. Its body started throbbing. The muscles on its body started to grow larger, sturdier and stronger. Soon, the normal-sized infected turned into a 2-meter muscled infected. It glared at Mark with an unhidden desire to tear him from limb to limb. Human. No. It spoke in a deep voice. Not human. Still. Die. Bam. It kicked the ground and leapt forward, leaving a meter-wide crater in front of the building. Day 59 to 3:34 p.m. Roxas Boulevard, Baclaran, Para plus or minus Aqua City, Metro Manila. The battle outside the walls of the settlement was an intense one. No, calling it as just intense was not enough, as the non-humans battled against each other. It was the battle of Mark, the one deemed as unknown by 3 deity-like beings, and the king of the infected, reigning over more than 100,000 infected. Just the battle in their area alone made the battle between the army of infected and the forces of Bay City settlement pale in comparison. The latter only had numbers while the former had strength. Of course, it was not that the forces of Bay City settlement or the infected horde were weak. They were strong compared to the normal level. It was just Mark, and the infected king was far more inhumane. Asterisk 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 at the sky, May and Chaflar teamed up to deal with the flying infected. With the dragon's help and letting May ride on its back, she had a more stable footing and was able to do more attacks. She did not have to worry about the recoil of the sniper rifle causing her to lose balance or not being able to maneuver properly. It had not been long since May gained her wings. Unlike other mutators that were able to create blades of bones, transform to enhance their bodies, or just their mutations changing their body structure, gaining wings was like having another pair of arms. She was able to fly and maneuver to an amazing degree, but a sudden lapse in her concentration could cause her to lose balance. It was the reason she relied too much on her force blink. Now that she was on Chaflar, although her line of sight became limited, she was able to attack more. She was even able to properly aim at the weak parts of the enemies, unlike before where she would need several shots to take down some of them. Chaflar and May rode the wind with the dragon-breathing flames while being surrounded by beams of light around that disintegrated the infected to dust. It was quite a sight to see. Amy below, currently standing atop a small building inside the walls of the settlement. Her tentacles were all facing the sky, shooting beams of light towards the infected. All her eyes were moving rapidly, making sure that each shot not only killed at least one infected while not hitting May and Chaflar on the sky. At the bridge of the southern gates, the infected were still swarming to go across it. Nevertheless, very few of them were able to take a step midway the bridge. If it was not a volley of poisonous needles that smelted their body parts, they would be greeted by strong winds that would knock them off from the sides of the bridge. Unfortunately, some were impervious to both those attacks. Of course, they were no other than the catapults. Not only that the poisonous needles were unable to pierce their skin, but they were also too heavy that they were able to ignore the strong wind. And thus, bam! A white-haired girl with cat ears and tail would handle them. Jumping around in the air, she would gather as much momentum as she could and deliver a kick to the back of the knee of the infected giants. The moment their knees bent and their balance was broken, several tentacles would drag them down off from the side of the bridge. Abigail and Miracle repeatedly did that for every catapult. There were times that the two reckless girls would be approached by other infected, but a corrosive barrier would always protect them. The eldest sister, Iola, was always watching the two. With the teamwork of the three girls, things were becoming more and more stable on their side. Back at the area of the collapsed corporate building, the battle was yet to continue. It was not hard to see what was going on. Mark and the King type were in a stare-down. Both of them deemed each other as dangerous. Mark was trying to see what did the changes on the King type's body brought. On the other hand, while it was trying to hold back its urge to attack, the King type was waiting for Mark to move first. However, of course, Mark would not do the first move. He had all his time to stare at this guy for now. Because the King type was entangled with him, it was unable to give instructions to his army. Due to that, the burden on the defenders of the settlement was lessened. If they just had to stare at each other, Mark would be able to find out more things about the King type, while the infected army was being annihilated. At that time, it would be easier to capture this thing and get the answers he wanted to know as help would come. Mark had been in confusion. It was why he was staring at the enemy. The mutated infected, once mutated, would stay mutated. They would not have the ability to transform back to their normal humanoid form. That was how it was so far. Yet, the King type suddenly became filled with muscles contrary to its previous appearance. It was almost similar to the smiling hero, the symbol of peace. Maybe it was the ability of infected at the King type's level. Still, he wanted to be sure. Of course, while Mark had enough patience, the infected king did not. Fed up from the stare-down, the King type moved. With its muscled legs, it kicked the ground, creating a crack on the cement under its foot. It charged towards Mark, a bit faster than the attacks it made before. The about 20-meter distance between Mark and the King type was traversed by the latter in less than a second. The moment it appeared in front of Mark, it was already unleashing its punch. Seeing the punch coming, Mark knew that it was not something that his body would be able to handle. Just the threatening pressure from the King type's stance was already trying to push him back. Sure enough, a single hit from a punch like this would kill him despite his armor. If it hit, that is. Mark's figure blurred as he half entered his subdimension. The punch was unleashed, but it just phased through his body. He then lowered his body and his blurry visage turned back to normal. At the same time, he drew flam from its sheath once more with his right hand and immediately made a flaming upward slash to counterattack. He was aiming to dismember the left arm of the King type. The slash hit and the sizzling smell of burning flesh appeared. Nevertheless, Mark just managed to make a half-inch deep wound on the King-type's armpit. It was stopped with just the King-type's flesh. Of course, Mark would not stop at something like that, and the King-type was the same. As its punch was dodged and it received the counterattack on its left armpit, the King-type felt hurt. It was late to retract his right arm that was still stretched out, and its left arm had gone numb. Thus, it moved its left shoulder back, pulling the sword with it while it unleashed a kick with its right leg. This diagonal kick was obviously aiming at Mark's head. Mark smiled. He tilted his body to his right while pulling his left shoulder at the same time. The swift kick passed just an inch away from his chest and face. Then, he used his left foot to follow the sword that was pulled back. He then let go and switched his hold to a reverse grip. The veins on his arms, waist, and right leg glowed brightly. He tightened the grip on the sword and kicked the ground with his right leg. It caused his body to spin counterclockwise with the strongest and fastest force he could unleash. A flamberge was a sword with a wavy blade that was almost identical to the shape of a saw. That sudden pull of the sword made by Mark created a grating sensation as the wavy, uneven blade of flame dug deeper on the King-type's arm. Combined with a huge burst of flames, the flesh was cut easier. Sheeing. A vertical wheel of flame was created by Mark's movements as the sword finally cut off the left arm of the King-type. The force from the spin and kick he made him fly back, spinning several times before landing on his feet, and the flames lessened. G G G G G U U U U U U U U U R R R R R R R R R H H H H H H H. A piercing scream was heard as the King-type staggered backward, clutching the stump remaining of its left arm. Plop. Plop. The muscled left arm rotated in the air before plopping on the ground. Mark was then surprised. The arm started to deflate, returning to its previous state. However, that was not the surprising part. What surprised Mark was because as it deflated, it released miasma at the same time, which immediately dissipated in the air. No way. Mark murmured. He never heard or seen something like this, even from the memories of the deity of bloodshed. It was an entirely unknown thing to him. He turned his eyes back to the King-type, struggling with the extreme pain it was feeling. From the stump Mark had just cut, miasma was leaking. The cut part also started to deflate. There was no doubt, this infected was using miasma to enhance its body. His eyes became eager. He had a very large amount of miasma in his body. If he could turn it into strength without releasing it, it would be easier for him to handle beings like this infected king. GGRRRRRRRRR. The King-type glared at Mark while in pain. It looked at its dismembered arm. It then moved. Of course, to retrieve the arm that was cut off. Nevertheless, as the King-type was about to grab it, a wavy black mist passed by and the arm vanished. The mist swooped upward and Mark appeared on the air while holding the King-type's left arm. I don't know if you can reattach this thing, but I will not let you have it. Mark spoke. GGGGGGRAHHH. The King-type roared menacingly. That roar made a lot of the flying infected above sweep down and gather around the King-type. However, with the state of the King-type right now, it was the best time to catch it. Mark would not back down because of some flying infected. Holding the arm in his left and the flamberge clad in flames in his right, he took a deep breath. The veins all over his body glowed brightly as his blood circulated fast inside his body. Both adrenaline and the enhancer on his blood circulated along with his blood. At the same time, the innumerable amount of flying infected charged towards him. Swoon. He flapped his wings, charging forward with high speed. He landed on the ground. Matching his speed, he started to spin around while running, causing a waving movement of flames all around his body. As the flames spun and waved following his spins and movements, it was like he was dancing. No, it was definitely some kind of dance. Dance of the Fire God, he murmured along with a song playing in his mind. His sword and body spun around, slashing everything that came his way. The flying infected, one by one, was slashed to death while covered in flames. Finding an opening, he kicked the ground. At the same time his wings propelled his body. He appeared in front of the king type. Furiously, the king type ignored its pain and counter-attacked with another punch. Nevertheless, unlike before, its movements were sluggish. The infected king was not an eater but a highly evolved biter. Its senses fully worked and the pain from losing an arm affected it severely. Mark kicked using his right foot, avoiding the punch while sending his body for another vertical spinning slash. Rahhhhhhhhh. With the grating sensation on his hand, the remaining arm of the king type detached from its body. "Time to end this," he said as he spun around the back of the king type, and the flames waved towards its legs. Flames circled and danced around them, causing an intense scene. Thump! The limbless body of the king type fell down to the ground as the miasma in its body started to dissipate along with its weakened roars. Volume 6 End Day 59 to 3:42 p.m. Parking area, S&R membership shopping, Diosdado Macapagal Boulevard, Baclaran, Para plus or minus Aqua City, Metro Manila. Gra. Croc. Gawk. Rahhhhh. The infected king had fallen. It was, without a doubt, defeated. Nevertheless, the battle did not end there. Limbless and in pain, the king type repeatedly growled and roared. It squirmed its torso violently in its last attempt of struggle. Following its roars, however, its people, the infected army, responded rather violently. Ignoring everything, the catapults, the flying army, and the 100,000 horde charged towards the direction of their distraught king. They all entered a crazed state. Charging forward while ignoring everything, yes, everything. They ignored everything, including the moat that surrounded most of Bay City settlement. Roaring and screaming, they all ran like there was no tomorrow. Since the infected king was way down south of Bay City, all the infected had to run towards that direction. It caused the immediate fall of the northern horde. The infected army at the north stood in front of the moat south of them. Running south without minding anything was the worst thing they could do. Except for the ones at the northeast corner of the settlement, the rest fell unto the murky waters. While the moat was not too deep, the water was to some extent. As they continued to traverse the waters, the deeper they sunk into the channel. The biters immediately turned into slower eaters due to the lack of air. The catapults became stuck in the mud and sunk deeper and deeper as they tried to move. While their heads managed to remain over water, their bodies were too heavy. The muddy waters of the reclaimed area would not be able to keep them from sinking further. Because of the current happening, the defensive forces in the northern walls became confused. Nevertheless, the chance to retaliate without worries finally came. Captain Della Rosa, who led the forces on the north wall, shouted on his radio. "Throw the nets." Following his command, the soldiers threw nets unto the murky waters. Of course, these were not fishing nets. "Captain, the nets are ready," the soldiers shouted one by one through the radio. "Turn it on," the captain commanded. "Roger, turning it on." Crackle. Following their echoing voices in the radio, the sounds of cracking and sizzling followed. What they threw were copper nets woven from electrical cables. It was one of the defense measures Bay City had, especially on the northern walls where the moat was lower compared to the other sides. Unfortunately, they could only use this once the horde entered the waters. With the horde avoiding dropping into the moats before, they were not able to use it. Now, however, it was the time for the nets to shine, literally. With the electricity equal to a fourth of what Bay City accumulated, the copper nets created an electric field. With sparks here and there, electricity blanketed the waters. This method might create some mutations, the scientists of Bay City said. It was a highly possible scenario. Nevertheless, with the high voltage of electricity on the nets, frying the infected's brains would come first before they mutate. Soon, the murky waters of Libertad Channel, the water channel on the moat, became covered with floating corpses. Asterisk 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 with the catapults that stopped their task to throw the infected over the walls. The infected inside the settlement died out fast enough. The threat inside died down too quickly after the survivors mobbed them to death. On the eastern walls of the North District, General Perez immediately acquired information on what was happening. Although it did not look like the infected were retreating, the horde still left their previous positions. There was also the collapse of the building. The people on this side saw that clearly. They wanted to know what was happening so they could adapt their strategies. Hearing about the situation from Major Lopez himself, General Perez sighed in relief. It looked like that Mark really did subdue the horde. The current situation seemed to have stemmed from the defeat of the horde leader. Everyone! The general shouted. Sir! The squad leaders around him lined up and waited for his order. The situation is pretty much under control, however, we still need to back up the people that brought us on the verge of victory. The horde is coming their way. The general raised his assault rifle. Hear my orders. Fire at will. Reduce the number of the infected outside as much as possible. Yes, sir. With that, the relentless shooting of the infected commenced from the walls. Before, they needed to concentrate on reducing the number of the almost invincible catapults and kill the infected that entered the settlement. Now, all they needed to do right now was to kill any infected on their line of sight. Without the pressure of defending their home, they were finally able to unleash their frustration from the several hours of struggling. Asterisk 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 around the infected king, the flying infected gathered. They were swarming towards their king in an attempt to retrieve him. FWWWOOM. However, the devil clad in black armor and equipped with his flaming cursed sword stood on the way. No, the devil, he was actually stepping on the body of their king. The flaming sword waved around as the devil danced with his flaming sword. In every swing, an infected or two would fall while burning into flames. Once in a while, black pebbles could be seen bursting out of the heads of the infected. These black pebbles would then fly towards the devil and would disappear after landing on his right wrist. Alone, the devil contested against the flying horde, with his body glowing red, especially his eyes. A fearsome sight it was. Because his helmet did not cover his mouth at all, anyone would witness the sinister smile on his lips. Of course, it would not matter to the infected as they all swarmed towards his direction in an attempt to rescue their defeated king. Unfortunately, the number of flying infected was not enough. Their numbers had already dwindled to 2 digits with the efforts of May, Schafflar, and Amy. Swarming towards Mark was a complete suicide to those that remained. Soon, the last of the flying infected was killed. Then, the next enemies finally came. Soon as the flying horde was dealt with, the 100,000 horde was running ferociously towards Mark. But without the ability to fly, what could these infected do? Mark smiled as he sheathed flam on his back. He grabbed the infected king by his neck and created an extension from his armor around the neck of the king. He then flew forward the body of the gigantic flying infected and did the same. As he flew, he saw the soldiers on the wall throwing electric nets over the walls onto the water. Seeing that, he had an idea. Carrying the 2 bodies, he flew away. He flew towards the direction of the coast of Manila Bay to the west. Behind him, Schafflar and May followed. And of course, the horde chased after them frantically. Mark started to attack the king type with his blood whips, inflicting more pain to it. The sounds of the infected king screaming to its demise was painful to the ears. However, it was what Mark wanted. As the king type roared louder and louder, the more frantic the infected below became. Even the infected animals and insects in the water started to move. There were fewer of these kinds because of the methods of the military, but they were noticeable. Asterisk 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 finally, they reached the waters of Manila Bay. Luring the infected was a time-consuming task and it took more time than the actual battle. The speed of the infected varied and he needed to make sure that most of them were keeping up. Soon, one by one, the 100,000 infected entered the waters as Mark flew just a meter from the surface. The ones covered in flames caused the water to sizzle and their bodies started to become stiff. Mark continued to torture the infected king, which made the horde even more agitated. When most of the infected fell onto the waters, it was finally time. 2 crystals flew out of Mark's wrist and flew around him in circles. As he waited for all of the infected to enter the waters of the bay, he prepared. The 2 crystals glowed. One caused clouds to gather. Another agitated the electric charges in the clouds. Seeing the sky darkening, May, riding on Chaflar behind, already predicted what her Gurgur was going to do. Once all the infected entered the waters, a storm of lightning would strike them from the sky. She did not predict something, however. Seeing that the last of the infected stepped on the water, Mark smiled. Mark nodded on May and Chaflar and the 3 flew up to the sky. Then, May noticed that the clouds above started moving. To her surprise, some of the clouds started to fly down and form a visage of a giant old man with a long beard, wearing a robe and was holding a staff. At the same time, lightning started to fall from the sky, randomly striking almost everything below. The lightning even started to kill some of the infected under the water. May, who did not care about things outside her current family, could not help but scratch her head and look at Mark with a bitter smile. At least, Gurgur is enjoying things this much, she thought. Lightning then covered the staff of the visage. No one would be able to tell how much voltage of electricity was gathered at that moment, but it should be very large to kill all the infected even if they were underwater. Mark looked at the waters below filled with infected under and muttered, "Judgment bolt." The arms of the old man made of clouds then moved. It threw the staff made of lightning onto the water. As the staff entered the water of the bay, it exploded, causing a huge scatter of lightning and clouds around. The heat generated by lightning started to boil the water in a large area. The scale of this attack made the defensive measures of the bay city pale severely. As the clouds and lightning dissipated, the corpses floating at the bay appeared. About 100,000 corpses floating on the bay was the stuff of horrifying nightmares. Even the scene of corpses floating down the river in a certain alien invasion movie could not be compared to this. Nevertheless, they were in the apocalypse. Seeing them running around in the streets was more horrifying than seeing them floating on the bay and river as corpses. The most important thing, the horde was eliminated. Mark and his group could take a break for the rest of the day. They were more than tired for the last 2 days. He could also try and interrogate this thing in his hand. Of course, it was not the same as interrogating humans. He doubted that it could understand everything he would ask. Thus, he needed to come up with a way to get the answers from it. Mark took a deep breath. The glow on his body subsided. As he stopped the circulation of his adrenaline and the activation of his blood, his breathing started to become ragged. His body was shaking and he ground his teeth. It was too painful. He exerted too much burden on his body, especially on the move that he used to deal with the giant flying infected he was currently holding. "Chaflar, can you hold this for me?" Mark told the dragon and threw the dead flying infected. The dragon caught it with its legs. With the infected king that was now gagged with blood metal on its mouth, Mark plopped down on Chaflar's back. "Gurgur, are you okay?" May asked worriedly. She remembered the first time in the mall she saw Mark like this. Mark could already use a large amount of adrenaline in his body without a problem. Yet, it seemed that he still used more than what he could handle. There was also the upgrade in his blood that was not fully tested yet. Blood whips were then released by Mark, which secured the king type on Chaflar's back. Mark then sat beside May, tired. As the battle was finished, Crimson and Oracle started to turn back to normal. As soon as the armors were removed, Mark felt a pull on his shoulder. He did not resist and soon, his head fell on May's soft lap. While the 2 rode on the dragon's back, Chaflar flew into the settlement. Seeing the dragon enter, the people below cheered loud. Despite the frightening display, their settlement was saved. They did not know that the one they were cheering for already fell asleep. Day 60 to 9:02 a.m., Military Residences, North District, Bay City Settlement, Pasay City, Metro Manila. The previous day had already passed. It was now the day after the horrifying number of infected tried to invade Bay City. Throughout the rest of the day, the whole night, and the morning came, the military was still not done with the cleanup. There were a lot of things for them to do. First was to be sure that there were no infected left inside the settlement. Yesterday, a large number of infected entered the Bay City settlement because of the catapults, although most of them landed inside the settlement in gruesome ways that made them incapacitated. A lot still managed to kill an infected people. They were very lucky. If the military handled that situation poorly, it could turn the whole settlement upside down. Fortunately, it did not. Of course, even if the people started to help, the casualties still reached hundreds. The next thing they had to do was to remove the bodies out of the waters under the moats. It was also the same for the ones in Manila Bay. Such a task was not easy. Nevertheless, it was a very urgent thing for them to do. Bay City settlement's current water supply relied on purifying the water from the bay. To make it more contaminated was not something they wanted. There were also other things they needed to address. The military was too busy at this point. At the rooftop of the military residences, Mark, along with a few people, currently gathered. Immediately after the battle yesterday, Mark fell asleep. He woke up a bit after reaching the residence, changed clothes, and plopped on the bed afterward. It was until dinner that he finally recovered from his lethargic state. Mark overexerted his body in the battle. It was too apparent for May and the others to notice. While eating dinner, Ophelia reprimanded him severely for not taking care of his body. It was quite annoying, but her worry was heartwarming at the same time. As for the king type, Mark imprisoned it in a cage made of blood metal at the rooftop. Chaflar guarded it throughout the night. After its defeat, the king type grew weaker and weaker. It weakened until it returned to its natural form, of course, without limbs. The dark aura around its body already dissipated as if it never appeared at all. The military inquired about it since they saw Mark carrying 2 bodies before the final attack. However, since Mark was asleep at that time, the questioning had been postponed. Now, Mark was together with May, Odalina and Spera. They were here to confirm one thing. What was the reason the king type sent his army towards this settlement? With the miasma around its body exhausted, Mark learned that this infected was incredibly weak. It might be stronger than normal infected, but it was weaker compared to even the weakest mutated infected they knew. It indicated that it used the miasma stored in its body to strengthen itself. This might also be the reason that it sent its army instead of personally entering the settlement. The king type might have been able to store miasma in its body, but could not use it the way it should be used. The possibility that it could not keep its strengthened form for too long was also there. They tried to communicate with the king type. To their dismay, it was totally impossible. Their questions were answered with nothing but inaudible aggressive growls. Although it still muttered about finding the queen while idle, that was it. As such, Mark had another idea. It was to show the king type a few individuals. Those in the settlement that could possibly be the queen it was looking for. The first candidate was Amy, that was currently staying at a renovated building beside the military residences. Bringing Amy in the front of the king type, however, was a bad idea. Seeing Amy, it started to behave aggressively. Even more aggressive than it behaved around Mark and other humans. On the other side, Amy felt the same. If not for her having her previous memories, she might have attacked the king type immediately. Fortunately, Amy knew that Mark had some uses for the king type and restrained herself. After the two met, it took quite a while before the king type calmed down. They had to make Amy stay out of its sight for some time. To the stone Amy was carrying, the king type did not react at all. The same way the infected at NAIA ignored the stone after Amy's pod opened. As the days passed, it became more and more doubting whether there was really a life inside that stone. After that, they started to think that the queen it was looking for could possibly be a human. Nevertheless, they had to forget the thought immediately after. It was because, on their second attempt, they found the queen. Furthermore, there was not only one. On the rooftop, Mara and Monique entered. Mara was bringing her sister, Jeanette, in. On the other hand, Monique was bringing her daughter. The two were confused as to why they were asked to bring the two instances of docile infected in the settlement on the rooftop. The first to enter was Mara and Jeanette. Mark had the two pairs enter separately to avoid confusion. The moment the first pair entered, however, they were welcomed by violent growling and rattling of a cage. Queen. Quadruple A. The king type continued to struggle inside the cage, trying to get the attention of Jeanette. It even looked at Mara with ferocious eyes as it saw her holding the hand of its queen. Mara felt goosebumps all over her body. She could not help but step back. It caused her to lose grip of the hand Jeanette. The moment it happened, Jeanette suddenly ran towards Mark. She ignored the aggressive calls of the king type inside the cage and ran towards Mark. Like she did before, she grabbed Mark's hand and put his hand on her head. She behaved like a tamed cat as she rubbed her head on his palm. The infected king fell silent. Everyone felt awkward. Grrrr. The infected king roared as it released its anger. It found its queen. Yet, that queen was ignoring him for the being that defeated it. Of course, no one would find it forgivable. Then, an unexpected thing happened. Because of the roars, Monique became curious. She opened the door to the rooftop to take a peek. That was a wrong move for her as her daughter ran through the door. Trish. Monique yelled and chased after her daughter. Everyone was surprised. They suddenly saw Monique's daughter running towards the king type. As Mark could not let things like this happen, he immediately moved and grabbed Patricia. Mara, on the other hand, grabbed the hand of Jeanette, and for sure, she would not let go of it no matter what. Nevertheless, the roars of the king type suddenly stopped. The infected king looked at Patricia and Jeanette alternately in confusion. That was right. Even though it should have been incapable of showing or feeling emotions, the confusion on its face was apparent. Who? Its expression was too incredulous. If he was a normal human, he might have the expression of someone who thought that he might be dreaming. That made Mark realize. Looking at its expression, it seemed both Jeanette and Patricia were queen types. No wonder the two had similar characteristics as infected. The only difference between the two was that Mark had affected Jeanette too much that she started to gain a new consciousness, while Patricia remained a normal queen type. Unlike Jeanette, Patricia responded to the king type's calls. She was even struggling to break free from Mark's grasp. Still, the king type lied down inside the cage and continued looking at Jeanette and Patricia alternately. It was as if two queens should not exist in one place. Well, there was no way to know what was going on. Mark gagged the king type once more and nodded to Odalina. She reached out for a tarpaulin and then covered the cage with it. Gerger, Jeanette and Patricia are both queen types? May asked. They should be. Mark replied, though I don't think both of them can command the infected. He said his thoughts as he helped Monique restrain her daughter. Mark would want to see what would happen if he let the king type and a queen type meet. However, Jeanette completely ignored the poor infected king while Patricia was just a child. They already found the queen. It was time to end this for now. Master, what are we going to do with the king type? Odalina asked. Are his arms and legs collected? Yes. All right. Secure those for now. We will bring that king when we leave. Yes. And thus, after making sure that the king type was being guarded by Chaflar, they returned to their rooms. Mark still had a lot of things to do. One of those was to finish modifying the lorry and, if possible, modify another extra vehicle. Of course, the last vehicle would only be partly made of blood metal. Not long after they returned, however, Angeline and Paula came. The two were inviting May and Mark. Day 60 to 11:21 a.m. General's Residence, North District, Bay City Settlement, Pasay City, Metro Manila. Reaching the General's residence, Mark and May were guided by Angeline and Paula. To the two, They were actually inviting May to hang out a bit since Mark's group was not here for 2 days. As for Mark, however, it was Angeline's mother who wanted to meet him. Mark entered a bedroom and the two girls dragged May away. The three left Mark and Angelise alone. "You're here. Come here and sit." The beautiful woman sitting on the bed while holding a book smiled at Mark. She tapped the chair beside her bed. Although she was already fine, she was still too far from fully recovering. She had been living on life support for years. Her current state was not surprising. Mark nodded at her and took the seat. Before Mark could say anything, she spoke while looking above as if reminiscing something. "I've heard about what happened. I've been in a coma for years. It's very shocking to see my children all grown up too suddenly." She then looked at Mark. "Thank you for allowing me to meet them again." Angelise smiled. It was a smile filled with gratitude. Mark looked away. He was not embarrassed at all, but her smiling face was overlapping with Fried's mother in his memories. If Fried was still here, he would have started crying already. Taking a deep breath, Mark looked at Angelise. "What I did is not free." "I know." She nodded. "Still, I'm thankful. Also for what you did for my daughter. Saving her twice physically and once mentally." "They elaborated that much?" "My daughter just slipped." She chuckled. "You have questions for me, right? You mentioned it the moment I woke up." "Yes. I won't lie, but it is because you look exactly like someone I knew. That is why. It's about your origins. Do you know anything about it? All I heard from your husband is that you're an orphan. I want to know if there is anything else." Mark went straight to the point as there was no way to phrase it without sounding weird. To his dismay, Angelise shook her head. "I really have no idea. I was raised in an orphanage. I have been there so far as I remember. It was until my foster parents adopted me." "I see." Mark sighed. "Do you have any recollection about someone named Friodelius?" He asked hopefully, although he had no idea what he was being hopeful for. Unfortunately, Angelise shook her head. "Who is Friodelius? It's quite a weird-sounding name." "No, it's nothing. I just asked." Mark could not sense any emotional fluctuation from her that indicated that she was lying. Nevertheless, he felt genuinely dejected for some reason. Seeing that she had not been really helpful, Angelise felt down. It was when... "Ah, wait!" she exclaimed. "Can you please get me that bag there?" She pointed at the bag placed on a dresser which Mark immediately took and gave her. It seemed like the bag contained her important belongings as she carefully searched inside. Then, she took an oval-shaped metal locket about the size of an egg. "I really don't know about my ancestry, but this locket. The directress of the orphanage told me that this locket had been with me since they found me in front of their door." She handed the locket to Mark. Mark then looked at the locket, not expecting too much, only to become shocked. Day 60 to 11:35 a.m. General's Residence, North District, Bay City Settlement, Pasay City, Metro Manila. The answers Angelise gave Mark were unsatisfactory. Nevertheless, there was nothing he could do about it if she did not know anything. It was not her fault. About the locket, Mark received it without expecting too much. This locket which should have been able to tell her origins, but she remained oblivious about anything. Looking at the locket, however, Mark was frozen in shock. Without noticing Mark's expression, Angelise started speaking. "You see, my dad and mom. My parents that adopted me weren't able to bear a child. Mom had a problem with her body. It's a pity because they are rich and can't have an heir. That is why they looked for a child to adopt, and that's me." She sighed. "Like most orphans, I was happy. Dad and mom were also kind and treated me like their own child. But it did not last too long. They died in an accident when I was 19. That is when I had the urge to look for my real parents using that locket. I failed, unfortunately. No one can even open that locket without destroying it. It's even questionable if that is possible." Angeline looked at Mark. That was when she noticed that something was wrong as Mark's expression was too solemn while staring at her locket. "Is something wrong?" she asked. However, Mark did not reply. Nevertheless, she was rather surprised herself. It was because Mark's eyes were glowing with a deep purple color. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Mark stared at the locket with his expression going serious from shock. The locket looked like it was old. An antique preserved for a very long time. He could not tell what kind of metal this locket was made, but for sure, it was something very sturdy. Of course, the most pressing part of it was the crest carved on the cover of the locket. It was a sea serpent with wings winding around a trident. The wings of the serpent were slanted. The wing on the right lower than the left, and the head of the serpent was in front of the base of the trident's prongs. Without a doubt, this crest belonged to the royal family of the Lost Civilization. The Lost Civilization that was the ancestors of the residents of Arielis. Mark caressed the head as the sentiments freed left inside him flowed. Unexpectedly, scenes passed by his eyes. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. It was the night of a snowstorm. Two people wearing robes could be seen frantically running inside a snow-covered forest. They wore white robes that blended with the white snow. One of the two was carrying something covered with a thick cloth. By the shape of the cloth, it was very likely to be an infant. From the manner the two ran despite the thick snow, they were being chased. The two kept looking behind them from time to time. Luckily, the snowstorm immediately covered their tracks, delaying the ones chasing them. "Maririo, we can't keep this up, Alicia will freeze to death." The person carrying the infant worriedly spoke. From the voice, the person was a female, and it was easy to tell that she was the mother of this child. While she was talking, the strong blow of the wind knocked off her hood, revealing a beautiful woman with bright golden hair. As she was carrying the infant with both hands, she struggled to cover her head once more. The other person immediately helped her. "We have no choice, Ronelia. If they caught us, not only we will be executed, but our daughter will be put into their experiments." Hearing that, Ronelia lamented. "Just why do we have to be descendants of those deserters? There is nothing we can do about it. It had been an accident, we just need to leave this place." "No, if we took too long, it will be late for Alicia. I don't mind dying, but at least, she." As they continued, Ronelia saw a silhouette of building from afar. At the same time, Maririo suddenly turned his head behind with a serious expression. "Ronelia, they are coming closer," he said, even though there was no one in sight. "What should we do? Let us check that building. We should at least hide Alicia." Hearing that, Ronelia nodded without hesitation. When they saw the sign in front of the building, they felt relieved to some extent. It was an orphanage. "I'll seal her first. We should make sure that they won't find her," Ronelia said, in which Maririo nodded. "Sorry, my daughter, but we have to do this. We will return if we could. If not, I wish you a happy life." Ronelia set the infant down in front of the door, removed the part that covered Alicia's face to see her one last time. There, the sleeping infant with golden blonde hair could be seen. After kissing the infant's forehead with affection, Ronelia started while Maririo kept on the lookout. The mother stretched out both her hands onto the chest of the infant, and a small circle of light with many symbols appeared. It was, no doubt, a magic circle. As Ronelia sealed the infant, Alicia's hair darkened, and from her bright golden blonde hair, it turned into a pale yellowish color. When the sealing finished, Ronelia frantically knocked on the door to be sure that she would be heard from the inside. When the two parents sensed that there was someone coming, they hid. There, they saw a nun open the door and with shock, picked up Alicia. The nun then tried to look around but saw no one. She looked at the infant with pitiful eyes as she entered the orphanage once more. Seeing that expression of the nun, both Maririo and Ronelia were relieved. They then ran. Not to escape but to lead their pursuers in a different direction. As they ran away, Maririo noticed, "You left your locket?" "I did. If the worst came, in the least, I don't want her to think that we didn't love her." Hearing that, Maririo smiled. "Should we do this?" "Yes." Finishing that conversation, a magic circle appeared under the feet of the two before they moved in inhumane speed. This speed was not something an infant would be able to handle. While they were moving fast, It would also make them easily noticeable by their enemies, and that was what they wanted. Soon, they saw the enemies gaining on them. There were about a dozen of them wearing the same kind of robe but with a gray color. Mark felt a shake on his shoulder. He returned to reality too abruptly that he felt a bit dizzy. As sweat trickled from his forehead, he felt a soft cloth wiping his face. Looking around, May, Angeline, and Paula were already here. Angelise was still on the bed looking at him worriedly. It seemed that she called for the three because of what happened to Mark. "Hey, what happened to you? You scared us, you know?" Angeline complained. It was her who shook his shoulders, apparently. "Are you okay? Is there something wrong with my locket?" Angelise worriedly asked. She was scared and did not know what to do. All she was able to do was to call out for her daughter. Hearing those questions, Mark shook his head and returned the locket. "Nothing happened. It's just my body acting up." Being strong could also mean repercussions. That statement of his made Paula stiffen. Nevertheless, since she stood behind Angeline, she saw Mark's hand giving her signals not to say anything. She could only nod stealthily. "Thank you for answering my questions, but we should be going." Mark stood up from his seat. "Is that so? I wish you two can eat lunch with us." Angelise sounded disappointed. "Sorry, but my little girls would sulk if we ate lunch without them." Mark said an alibi, which was also true. Angelise looked at May and the latter also nodded. Without any choice, Angelise gave up. Of course, she still told the two to drop by sometime. As they left the room, Mark said one last sentence to Angelise before leaving. "Keep that locket with you at all times. It's important, so remember that." He did not wait for a reply and turned around while muttering, "Alicia." Leaving the room, Angeline was left behind to take care of her mother while Paula escorted the two. "What are you hiding?" Paula asked Mark. "I won't deny that I'm hiding something, but I won't tell you." Mark shrugged his shoulders. "Why? It should be about Aunt Angelise, right? Shouldn't she know about it? You're staring at that locket? If I said that it's a matter of life and death of her, will you stop asking?" Mark replied nonchalantly. However, Paula froze. No matter how nonchalant Mark was when saying that, she knew that he was not lying. "Okay. I won't ask anymore." Paula gave up. "Yeah, that's better. Maybe I'll tell her in the future if we met again. At least not now." Leaving the residence with May, Mark's mind was filled with thoughts. Angelise was in no doubt a descendant of the same race of Freed's ancestors. Their branch was probably among those that stayed behind and survived the calamity. That scene where Mark saw Ronelia's hair, it was the color of hair that was within the bloodline of Freed's mother. No wonder now why Angelise looked like Freed's mother. It was because of either her genes or bloodline. Two more facts bothered Mark the most. Due to the language barrier, Mark could not understand what Ronelia and Maririo were saying. Nevertheless, he could understand their context and read their expressions to some extent. Nevertheless, that barrier did not mask two obvious things. Angelisa's parents were not normal humans, even she was very likely. As displayed by the scenes he saw, they could be either witches or Western mages. Although some Eastern mages were also known for rituals with magic circles, the style he saw were more apparent in Western lores. The most bothering thing, however, was not their ancestral descent or their abilities. Those robes were not all new to Mark. Who would have thought that Angelisa's parents had direct involvement with Ouroboros? In fact, that style and color of robes meant that they were among the central members. They could have been members, but they probably defected from the organization. And the reason for their desertion was Angelise herself. While thinking those, Mark scratched his head. If he wanted more answers, he needed to confront Ouroboros. Furthermore, he was abruptly woken up from his vision, which surely made him miss more important details. "Gerger, can I ask something?" May spoke. "Sure, what is it?" "Is that locket something special?" Mark smiled. Of course, she would be curious since he said those words before they left. "That locket is sealed. Sealed. Not locked. You immediately caught my wordplay, huh? Mark shrugged. Sometimes, the silent May was rather too smart. Yeah, that's right. It won't open until her life is truly in danger. It's probably what kept her alive after what happened to her. I see. So it's like a life-saving amulet. To some extent, yes. Mark nodded. Once that locket fully opened, however, she should start counting her days, I guess. Those words made May confused, but Mark did not say anything else. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Once that locket opened, she will receive the legacy of her mother. Once that happened, however, it would be easier for Ouroboros to find her. It was unfortunate that she was the wife of the general leading Bay City. If not, he would invite her to his base. He would really want someone like her to be one of his people. He already had some odd creatures, so having another was not a problem. He already had a beef with Ouroboros. If Angelis knew the truth, she might likely join the fray in order to find the truth about her parents. Unfortunately, it was not the case. Still, Mark never thought that his clairvoyance would activate as such instance. Maybe, the force sealing the locket affected him and gave him the vision. He would not receive the answer that easily though. Day 60 to 2:12 p.m. Parking area, Military Workshop, North District, Pasay City, Metro Manila. After lunch, Mark was here at the parking area of the workshop, once more. Like before, the parking area he was working at was surrounded by a black wall. It was for nothing else but to obscure what was happening inside. To the military, they already knew that he could use blood to make the metal he used for his vehicle. Still, the exact method was unknown. If anyone else aside from his group knew about the blood children being capable of that, it could spell trouble. He would never want for the little critters to be the target of the eyes of people with ulterior motives. As for Mark's current goal, it was to build the Exceed disintegrator fortress. This day, he wanted to start the transformation of the lorry. Of course, the remaining half of the day would not be enough since he spent a whole day just modifying the external appearance of the Exceed personnel carrier. If needed, he would spend an all-nighter to finish this, and probably the whole day tomorrow. There was also the need for another vehicle for Edward's group. He would also modify Roland and Nikki's Jeep to some extent. As Mark and the blood children started their work, he began to ponder about other things. Mark already asked his friends for the final time to decide who would leave with him. At first, he planned to take just May, the little girls, and Odalina's family, but his base needed more trustworthy people. It would be good if they all came. However, it seemed that only a few of them had positive feedback with their mental fluctuations. First was Monique's group. Since her daughter had unique circumstances, it would be better to stay near Mark, who managed to tame Jeanette. Unlike Jeanette, Patricia did not show any improvement from her state. Next was Nikki, Roland, Daniel, Dorothy, and Mara. Their group would disband soon because two of them, Vincent and Delia, wanted to stay. Carlo, his sister, Anna, and Sandra were also going. There would be nothing else for them to stay here. They were also tired of the tension always happening here in this settlement. If possible, they wanted peace and quiet. To forget everything that happened in the past. RV's group would also go. Every one of them. They were good combatants that made them very welcome. For the new ones, Edward and Philip decided to follow, bringing Emmy with them. And since Colleen was with Mark, Annalyn would also follow. Terence, on the other hand, was still reconsidering his thoughts. As for the others, some were reconsidering while some did not want to go. Well, they still had a few days. Mark just wished that they would settle things sooner since the vehicles and supplies they needed for the travel had to be considered and prepared. Other than planning their leave, Mark had another headache. Those people that wanted to invite him before were personally coming to visit instead. It started yesterday afternoon at the time he was asleep. The trigger of this was his open display at the battle yesterday. At first, they wanted to invite Mark and meet him. Now, however, they decided to pay respects to him instead. Of course, Mark denied them. Nevertheless, they would not stop. It was as if they could not even understand that Mark did not want to have any business with them. As for May's family, they were unusually silent. They did not bother him, May, or even the general. Mark could not understand what was going on with their minds. Huh. Mark sighed. I have a lot of things in mind, it's tiring. In the least, he had one thing addressed. It was the request of Professor Isaac County to let him study the king type, at least until Mark and his group leave Bay City Settlement. Mark agreed as it would lessen his work. In exchange for allowing them to study the king type, they would give him a copy of the results. Lastly, they would not damage the infected king any further. The general had no reason to disagree with the conditions and assured him. *******, day 60 to 2:39 p.m. Testing room, Military Laboratory, North District, Pasay City, Metro Manila. Professor Isaac Company, Nia, and Alan were currently studying the king type, together with other scientists. General Miguel Perez was also in attendance. They had received Mark's approval to study the king type about 2 hours ago. Nevertheless, the professor already started the tests with great enthusiasm. General Perez was here to ensure that the professor would not go too far in his experiments. If Professor Isaac damaged the king type, due to his enthusiasm, it would be grave, as he was the one who assured Mark. Being here also served as his rest, as the general had been busy all this time. Unfortunately, even if it was crucial, they could not get a claim for the king type, even for the sake of research. Since the military started to collect mutagen stones, it had been a rule that the one who killed or defeated the infected had a claim for it. Of course, it was to lessen the conflict among survivor groups that participated during defense battles and missions, while also making them eager to help. The current room used for the experiment was large. It was because, aside from the king type, they also had several infected inside the room. At the center of the room, they strapped the limbless king type in an operating table. The king type had different kinds of apparatus sticking on its body, especially on its head. The scientist checked different things like pulse, brainwaves, and also took a tissue, blood, and saliva samples to put under tests. Interesting. Professor Isaac muttered as he checked the vital signs of the king type. From what he had seen, aside from the symptoms of anemia due to loss of blood, the other things were completely normal. It was as if the infected king was a standard human. Checking it physically, its muscles and body composition was the same. They even found out that it was physically weaker than a normal infected, which they think was strange. The oddest thing, however, was its brainwaves. From their monitoring device, it was extremely chaotic. The graph they saw told how restless its brainwave was. It might not even be wrong if there were several brains inside its head. However, there was only one. Furthermore, the king type was remarkably sensitive to pain. When they took a blood sample using an injection, its brainwaves spiked, and its vital signs showed signs of agitation. The infected king roared. As that happened, the infected shackled and caged inside the room reacted violently. Firsthand, they saw how the king type could affect the other infected around it. Despite its chaotic brainwaves, it was as intelligent as a child. It could even recognize the one that took its blood sample all this while. The poor scientist could not properly focus on his work as the king type's killing intent was directed on him. Of course, the scientist was oblivious to it while only feeling distraction on his mind and body. General Perez, Nia, and Alan noticed that killing intent and suggested for the scientist to take a break. Once that scientist left, the killing intent inside the room lessened. Of course, it had not completely disappeared, as the king type wanted to slaughter everyone here if he could. Then, another scientist came in. He was holding on a clipboard with several papers attached to it. Professor, the other samples are not done testing yet, but the results for the salivaomics is already here. The scientist said to Professor Isaac. Good, give it to me. The professor immediately took the clipboard and checked it. Aside from the printed report, there were also pictures clipped in between. Is this true? After getting to a point in the report, Professor Isaac turned to the scientist and asked skeptically. Professor, I know it might be unbelievable. However, that is what we found out initially. We are also surprised by the result. So if you will allow us, we want to take another saliva sample and test it again to be sure. Hearing that, the professor nodded sternly. Go. Take another sample immediately. Yes, Professor. As he got permission, the scientist took some equipment and began extracting saliva from the king type. For standard subjects, taking their saliva would be easy. For the infected, they needed more caution and specialized equipment. Isaac, what does it say for the need to repeat the initial test? General Perez approached the professor in curiosity. Professor Isaac flipped the papers and examined the pictures once more before handing the clipboard to the general. He specifically opened the report on an exact page. This. The general was also surprised. Get it now? Professor Isaac turned his head on the king type, at the center of the room. An infected with no unstable strain on its saliva. It is the first we encountered. Does this mean that it can't infect others through his bite? The general frowned. Until a further test proved this could either be a good or a bad thing. If the king type could not infect others, it might be the best scenario. However, what if it had other methods of spreading the infection to people aside from its saliva? They needed to be careful about it until they finalized the results. Other areas also required testing. Isaac, we need to be sure about this. Can we make use of one of those subjects? Isaac asked. Are you talking about the prisoners? The general replied with another question. Are there other things I call experimental subjects? I guess. There's none. The general shrugged. Those prisoners were not just ordinary criminals but those that the military apprehended after the apocalypse. Furthermore, they committed crimes far from anyone would be able to accept. Now, they had a purpose for being kept by the military. That purpose, to be used in the military's testing and experiments. It might be called inhumane and unethical, however, it was for the sake of knowing more about mutagen. Furthermore, what these people did was far more inhumane. It was already good that they still lived and were not killed on the spot. Probably, even getting killed over and over was not enough for them to atone for their sins. Not following the law after when the apocalypse came was one thing, abandoning their humanity was another. Now, to be used for the sake of what they abandoned, that was their purpose. How many do you need? About 5 will do. I have sorts of things to test. Hearing that, the general called upon one of the soldiers guarding the experiment. Professor Isaac also called for Nia. Nia, you file a request for the subjects. Yes, Professor. Nia and the soldier left. Even though the professor and the general were the highest people here, they still needed to follow the formal procedures. While observing the experiment, Professor Isaac and General Miguel talked. It's really a pity that Mark doesn't allow us to test those lasses. The professor talked about Jeanette, Patricia, and Amy. You should be content for what you were given. Those girls you are talking about are they're precious to them. I know that. But who would not want to study 2 docile infected and a mutated infected that had human memories? Just the thought of them existing is just insane. That's true, but there's nothing we can do. Yeah, there's nothing. The worst part of it is just how they are all in one group. They even had a dragon and several unknown creatures. The research results we received from Quezon is just not enough. Hearing Professor Isaac raising his voice and throwing a tantrum like a child, everyone in the room either shrugged their shoulders or sighed. They have been used to this. Probably, he would only stop until the result of the next test came out. Day 61 to 6:02 a.m. Parking area, military workshop, North District, Pasay City, Metro Manila. Yawn. Mark stretched his arms and back as he shook the sleepiness he had away. He expected this to happen before he started this work yesterday afternoon. The remaining time of yesterday was not enough to finish the modification of the lorry. Since he ended up getting hooked on his work, he had no problems pulling out an all-nighter. Nevertheless, as the sun started to rise, he felt the need to sleep. It seemed that he had gotten used to getting sleep even just an hour or 2 every night. His body lost the ability to stay up for 2 or 3 days straight like when he was watching an anime marathon or getting hooked up on playing a video game. Looking at the blood children, they were still as active as ever. As long as they could get the energy they needed from consuming blood, they could go on without shutting down their selves. Mark wished that he had the same kind of ability. It would be helpful in many ways. As for the little girls who were, as usual, with him, May picked them up after sending him dinner. May, Odalina, and especially Ophelia, were worried about him pushing himself too much. Nevertheless, Mark genuinely enjoyed modifying these vehicles and putting pieces by pieces of it. Since he was little and even before he became an otaku, Mark liked the idea of creating stuff. As a child, he would always play with building bricks and assembled toys. When he learned to draw and started to watch anime and movies, he began designing weapons and equipment more than actual characters. When he became older, like in high school and college, he regularly stared at plastic model displays whenever he encountered one. He always hoped that he could buy these fascinating things. Unfortunately, he was just a poor guy who could not even buy a lock for the door of his own house immediately. Now, not only he had been able to build things in the same manner, he was even creating his own. It was a fascinating feeling that his trade as a mutator could not mask. That was why when May, Odalina, and Ophelia saw the interest and joy in his eyes as he worked on the vehicles, they just sighed and let him be. Aside from battling against the infected or killing people that deserve it, they rarely saw Mark display such genuine expression. They did not want to destroy it. Master and His Majesty Friodelius are the same in this regard. Ophelia remarked last night. Although Mark heard that while he was working, he decided to ignore it. It was because there was no way to deny it at all. Like Mark, although it was kind of different, Fried also had fascination over creating things. On his side, however, it was about the technology their gods left their ancestors. When they left for the night, Mark continued to work with the blood children, of course. Miracle was with him as one of them. There was no need to request lighting with the existence of a Laula, and they were able to work smoothly. When morning came, Mark was quite satisfied already. He already finished modifying the lorry. No, it was now the Exceed Disintegrator Fortress. Than its previous appearance, it looked more like a mobile construction vehicle now from a particular video game franchise. The carrier at the back was more spacious and built with 2 layers. The lower smaller layer was to contain cargo. On the other hand, the upper larger layer was to be ridden by people, especially Amy. With compartments here and there along with the self-loading rock in front, ejecting weapons and gun mounts, Mark finished the initial design. He might upgrade this vehicle, but that would be in the future. For now, he was already confident about it. Mark then looked at the few other vehicles parked and at the wagon containing the blood bags. Yep, I still have materials to use for a bit of modification on the others. It seemed that he had no plans to rest until he finished this work. Not long after he continued working, he felt a presence outside the wall he created. For the safety of the people around, the military guarded the wall in shifts, guaranteeing that only those with a personal connection to him would be able to approach the area. As Mark created an opening, the new addition to his group, Jaya, entered. She was not alone. On her hands, she was carrying a box made of blood metal. "You're alone?" Mark asked while closing the wall. "Sis is already awake preparing breakfast with Miss Odal. Iola and Gale are still asleep." She immediately replied, "Anyway, I want to ask what this is." Jaya's voice echoed in his mind and was obviously asking about the box. "You should just ignore that." "Ignore?" Jaya seemed more agitated than usual. "Can't you hear it?" Of course, Mark could hear it clearly. He just blatantly ignored the fact that the voice of a baby crying sounded from the box. "Huh, May and Odal should already have told you about that, right?" Mark said with a sigh. There was no way the two would not tell her. He already told the two about his goal of raising this infected baby. It was just he was busy to deal with it immediately. In the first place, it would not be hard to know its diet. Mark and May saw how the other infected babies in the hospital ate their dead kind. Unfortunately, there was no way to get fresh animal meat right now. Mark wanted to try and raise if differently from normal infected. "They did tell me, but can I see it?" Jaya requested. As Mark and the blood children were the only ones able to open this box, anyone would need his permission. In any case, there should be no problems with letting her see it. Besides, the infected babies might be infected, but since they had a better instinct for survival, they were not overly hostile. Mark opened the box for Jaya to see. There, she saw the baby boy that did not look any different from a regular baby aside from its pale-colored eyes. The baby lay inside the box naked. It was clean, and it was lying in soft cloth as Mark tasked Odalina to take care of it. Of course, as Odalina could only open and close the box with Mark's help, the cleaning yesterday was done here in the parking area. This made it impossible for Jaya to see the infected baby beforehand. The moment they opened the box, the baby stopped crying. It was looking at the people that opened the box. When the infected baby saw Mark, it shivered like a small animal. It seemed like their mother's order to stay clear of Mark, and his group was still fresh in its mind. If it could crawl away and escape, it might have already done so. Unfortunately, it was cornered inside a small box and can only freeze in fear. Mark was not new to this behavior of this infected baby. Actually, Mark started to question whether this was really an infected or they were just another new race of creatures born from the infected. With the existence of the blood children, it was not impossible to happen. In fact, the way it behaved contradicting the behavior of the infected so far with the exception of a few intelligent ones. Among them were the king type and queen types. "Can I hold it?" Jaya asked. Mark looked at her in confusion, as normal people would surely feel repulsive after knowing that the baby was an infected one. Thinking about it, Jaya was not normal either. Furthermore, the infected baby was not really strong and it did not have teeth or sharp nails to injure someone. It should be fine if she just wanted to hold it. Still, Mark wondered why Jai seemed to have some fascination with infants to the point of wanting to hold an infected baby. Seeing her hold the baby like normal, Mark knew that she had some experience in it, probably with Abigail. While being carried, the baby made no suspicious movement. Rather, it ignored Jaya, who was carrying it, and continued to stare at Mark warily. As he could not stay idle at all, Mark decided to look around the other vehicles to see what modifications he could do with the remaining blood bags he had. While he was checking behind the jeep of Nikki's group, he heard a hum in his mind that he decided to ignore. Then, Miracle started tugging on his pants. "Papa, what is Aunt Jaya doing?" she innocently asked. When Mark looked, his eyes turned wide. He immediately dashed towards Jaya and pulled the infected baby off her, causing it to cry fearfully. White liquid splashed around as the dumbfounded Jaya looked at Mark with her right chest bare. "Wah! What are you doing?" Mark yelled, making Jaya swallow what she was about to say. Looking at the furious Mark, Jaya covered her dripping chest with a teary eye. I what? I just thought he is hungry, so." "Hungry? Do you know that you can get infected with what you did?" Mark was absolutely furious. He would not that worried about Jaya if she was nothing but a stranger capable of telepathy. However, she was Abigail's aunt and possibly the little girl's only relative left. The little girl might look calm about it, but her mood had been lighter since yesterday after she met Jaya. Mark did not want that to disappear because her aunt did a foolish thing. Infected? Jaya was stunned. Don't the infected needed to bite to infected someone? That baby didn't have teeth? The infected turn people by their saliva, not their bite. Jai froze. She was completely stunned. I don't know. Tears finally flowed from her eyes. First from Mark's anger, next from the fear of what she had done. Seeing that, Mark's anger subsided a bit. Furthermore, his trait erased the rest. Calming down, Mark could not blame her. She already told her story to them, and she was even complaining about how her chest was aching yesterday. From the start of the apocalypse, she was confined in the Dark Greeds collection without knowing anything about the infected. The thing she had done this time was probably because of the lingering emotions she had from her depression and about losing her son. Unfortunately, Mark could not feel her exact emotions because of how chaotic her mind fluctuation was. If he knew, he would not have agreed to her request. Nevertheless, even if it could not infect, Who in the right mind would try to breastfeed a baby born from an infected? This showed how Jaya's head was not working properly. Mark returned the crying infected baby inside the box and locked it. Mark wanted to curse even if he disliked doing so. Jaya, just stay here. We need to observe whether you are going to turn or not. Got it? Hearing his words, Jaya nodded. If she became a mutator, it would be good. Even if she became a failed one, Mark could handle it immediately. The worst case was if she turned into a normal infected, or worse, into a mutated one. The moment that happened, they would only be able to lament her fate. Even if Mark was here, there was no assurance that she would become the same as Jeanette and Patricia. And even if she did, the previous Jaya would surely cease to exist. In any case, Mark had to try something once symptoms of her turning happened. Because of what happened, Mark postponed the modification of the other vehicles. He stayed by Jaya's side, who was staying silent. Soon, May and the others arrived to bring breakfast. As they heard about what Jaya did, they were worried about both her mental and physical state. Especially Abigail. If not for her mutator trait severely affecting her display of emotions, she would have cried already. She even sat beside her aunt holding her hand. The noontime arrived. However, none of anything they had expected happened to Jaya. Day 61 to 3:22 p.m. Hospital area, Military Laboratories, North District, Bay City Settlement, Pasay City, Metro Manila. Mark, wearing his mask, May, and Abigail sat in the waiting area of the laboratory. Because of what Jaya did, Mark had to postpone the modification of the remaining vehicles. After noontime passed and nothing happened to Jaya, Mark decided to bring Jaya to the laboratory for checking. To be sure, he also brought the infected baby to the laboratory. Because it was not easy to disclose the origin of the baby without causing a commotion, Mark had to lie. He told the doctor that met them personally about checking for possible mutagen infection on the two. This was not the first time the people in the laboratory received an inquiry like this. The speed of people turning for each individual infected by the mutagen unstable strain was fundamentally different. That was why the laboratory would handle such cases from time to time. Due to that, however, they already had a protocol to follow. For the time record of a person turning, the longest the military experienced was 22 hours. That was why it would not be impossible that other instances could occur. Nevertheless, having VIP treatment was superb. While people had to wait in queues in the lobby, the laboratory personnel immediately directed them inside. Since things were urgent, they had not eaten lunch yet. Unfortunately, it was forbidden to eat outside appointed areas in the laboratory. Mark tried to tell May to lead Abigail out to eat first, but the little girl did not want to and patiently waited beside Mark. Despite her calm expression, Abigail was worried. She did not even remember taking advantage of Viola and Miracle not being present to solo Mark's lap on her own. Finally, the results they were waiting for arrived. Unexpectedly, the one delivering the result was no other than Nia instead of the doctor they spoke with before. Seeing Mark looking at her with a strange look, Nia smiled. "Sir must be wondering why I'm here. The staff reported to us about the circumstances and I led it personally. Hearing your requests are our utmost priority after all." Nia spoke respectfully. Not only her but Alan would behave the same way when around Mark. The first reason was Mark being able to strip away what they had now with a wrong move, and another was because while they look at Mark, they felt lower and guilty for a reason they could not fathom. Hearing her reason to be here, Mark nodded. "What about the result?" Mark asked. He could feel that even Abigail and May were getting anxious. To Abigail, she was her last relative, while to May, she was like a sister. Not only because she was Abigail's aunt, but Jaya did not treat her any differently. Having the thought of having a sister was new to her and was quite enjoying it. The problem, however, was that the role of the two was reversed, with May behaving as the older sister despite being younger. The short pause from Nia seemed too long. "There is no need to worry about the mother and the baby, they are both normal." Half relieved and half confused. That was what Mark and May felt. Of course, the little girl was all relieved. Is something wrong? Nia noticed the odd atmosphere. Can you bring us to them? Mark asked. Of course, there is no problem. Please follow me. As such, Nia led the way. Asterisk 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 they were led unto the high security rooms of the hospital area. It was the area reserved for these kinds of tests. Not only several soldiers were stationed in the area, but the rooms were built to last if the patient being checked suddenly turned or mutated. As Nia led them, they passed by the bulletproof window of the room they were about to enter. There was Jaya inside and they saw her immediately. Mark hung his head low while rubbing his temple. This woman was a total headache. On the hospital bed, Jaya lay sideways, happily breastfeeding the supposed, infected, baby. May sighed and even the little girl understood the predicament her papa and mama were having. Jaya was concentrated on breastfeeding the baby that she did not even notice that she was being watched. Nia was waiting for Mark to open the door and enter first. As she was not related to the patient, it would be better if she entered last. Nevertheless, she could not understand why the three people in front of her were behaving oddly. What tests did you perform? Turning to Nia, Mark asked. The standard tests. Body temperature, pulse and heartbeat checking. The most important were urine and saliva checking. The tests were a good set for checking possibly infected people. Body temperature and heartbeat alone could tell if a person had been infected since they would experience a very high fever and their heart would start to palpitate. Furthermore, an infected person's urine and feces did not only reek several times stronger but would also contain blood as their insides transformed. As for the saliva, it was the most important indicator. Any person infected, even before turning, would already produce an unstable strain of mutagen. It meant that if a person were infected, he could immediately infect others without turning into a full-blown infected. And there was the problem Mark and May had in mind. Despite these tests, they deemed the baby to be normal. Are you really sure that the baby is normal? Mark asked, which made Nia even more confused. Is there really something wrong, sir? I would not understand if you don't tell me. Nia respectfully asked. Leaving things like this, they would not get anywhere. Can you keep a secret? Something that you won't tell that crazy professor of yours? Mark sighed. He decided to tell the circumstances. Yes, you can count on me. Nia nodded with a stern expression. Probably, other than the professor, she would only show such expression around Mark. Mark then took out a phone and opened the gallery. There, he showed the grotesque pictures and videos of what they had encountered inside the nursery ward in Perpetual Help Medical Center. This is? Nia asked, seeing the breeder type infected. The mother of that baby there. Mark pointed at Jaya and the baby inside the room. You can see that umbilical cords on that infected? One of those is connected to that baby before I took it. It seems like you found a rather unique infected there. Nia looked at the pictures with interest. She would also change expressions as she saw the pitiful-looking babies born of the breeder type. You said that the baby is normal. Mark said the pressing matter. I see. Nia finally realized why they were behaving oddly. Can you follow me for a bit? It is not far from here. It's fine. But where are we going? Sir will know later. Nia said as she led the way. Soon, they reached the maximum security area of the laboratory. The entrance was being guarded by several heavily armed soldiers. Nia showed her ID and they were given entry. She then stopped in front of a glass window of a secured room. Inside, there was a healthy baby sleeping. Seeing that, Mark and May were sure. Is that what we think it is? Mark asked. Yes. An infant born of the infected. Nia said to confirm their thoughts. The mother of this one might not be as grotesque looking as the one you showed me, but I believe they were in the same circumstances. Nia then turned to the baby inside the room. And as I could say, we consider this baby as normal. Hearing that, it piqued Mark's interest. So, you are saying that an infected mother could give birth to a normal human baby? Yes. Nia nodded. The circumstance is very rare, and as we researched, there could only be a single instance this could happen. Nia then narrated the information Mark needed to know. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. It started when the military was still building the walls of the settlement, way back when the outbreak began. The baby in front of them currently was born from pregnant a woman the military found and rescued. However, she was already infected the moment they found her. For the sake of research, they took the woman in as the researchers wanted to study what would happen inside the baby inside the mother's womb. That pregnant woman turned into a mutated infected. While she was turning, however, she suddenly gave birth to a baby girl. The soldiers thought that it was already late as they saw the umbilical cord attached to the baby was already odd-looking and the placenta was still attached to the mother's womb. Despite that, they took their chances. A soldier cut off the umbilical cord and brought back the baby. Under testing, they found it normal. However, not only the baby girl opened its eyes too early but also learned to crawl in about a week. Furthermore, aside from milk, she preferred a soft meat diet despite not having teeth yet. The most important thing, they did not carry any unstable strain in their saliva or other parts of their bodies. Other tests were still ongoing about how different the baby girl was compared to a normal human infant. Asterisk asterisk. We tried to recreate such scenarios with infected pregnant women brought in but all of it failed. Nia continued. We also tried fertilizing ovum from infected women. It was rarely fertilized and the growth of the fetus was rather fast. However, what we ended up with were unsightly infected critters like the babies in the pictures you showed me earlier. So, you are saying that the baby I took might be the true baby inside the mother's womb which she gave birth to while mutating? Mark asked. Yes, sir. Exactly as you said. Although most of it is still in theory, that could only be the answer we can find right now. Shouldn't it mutate or turn into an infected since it is connected to the mother for a long time? Mark said while contemplating. I can't answer that precisely. Nia shook her head. However, I have a theory. The Z-type A, the ones you call biters. Aside from their instinctual urge to bite to infect people and their increased stamina and strength, all other functions of their bodies are the same. It could have been the same for the mother's umbilical cord which only transferred nutrients to the baby that is already outside its womb. It's just a theory, right? Mark asked. Yes, unfortunately. I see. Mark scratched his head. I don't know if I lucked out on this one or not. I wanted an infected baby and see how it will evolve. Why, sir? I guess it is lucky for you. We only have one despite our hundreds of attempts. Sir, on the other hand, pick that baby boy out of all the infected babies you saw. It was not really luck. Mark only picked the most decent looking among the babies. Who would have thought that real infected babies had no way of properly developing as a fetus? No wonder the others looked unsightly. With those thoughts in mind, Mark's expression grew stern. So, a new race of humans possibly appeared, he voiced out. Yes. That was what we also hypothesized. We still don't have a proper name for them, but Professor calls them neo-human. Nia nodded with a serious expression. Finally, they had some answers though there were still obscure things they needed to confirm. The most important thing that Jaya would not be infected because of her broken head. Not only that, since the baby was not really an infected one, but Mark could also appoint Jaya to take care of it. Her loneliness would be addressed although it was not her child. It also seemed like she had taken a liking to it. Hearing the good news, Jaya was totally delighted. She immediately jumped up from her bed forcing the baby off her chest which she immediately regretted. Mark could only sigh when Jaya started talking to the baby and even approached him showing how the baby suckled on her chest. She did not even realize how afraid the baby was while she approached Mark. Day 62 to 12:32 p.m. General's Office, North District, Bay City Settlement, Pasay City, Metro Manila. The day of the worrying event had passed with another all-nighter. Half of the night was because of the remaining work Mark had to do while the other half was because of another horde of infected appearing near the vicinity of Bay City Settlement. It was a considerably big horde. There were about 1,000 infected in it. Because of the last event with the King type, the military started to practice high alert with infected hordes attacking the settlement. After all, no one would know what kind of infected could be present within the horde. Another, king type, appearing was also possible. Still, such cases of hordes randomly attacking the settlement were normal. According to May and Odalina, it had always been like this. This alert, right now, was because the people were still paranoid about the last event. Leaving the horde aside, Jaya's predicament yesterday was settled with her adopting the child as her own. Mark had no qualms about it. Although he was also interested in the babies called neo-humans, he was more interested in the growth of infected babies. Unfortunately, he already scorched the entire building to ruins before they left that place. Since he secured that everything inside that building would burn, Mark did not think that any of them would survive. Nevertheless, having her adopt the child created a positive effect on Jaya. Her chaotic mind had gained a bit of stability, and Mark could already read her emotional fluctuations. It was a good start for her recovery. As for the rest of the night, Mark finished using up all the blood bags he had. The remaining blood bags left after he modified another vehicle for their use, and modifying the lorry was more than enough for the simple modifications he made on the vehicles of his friends. He even had enough to make a few swords and spears. Right now, he was in front of the general's office and was about to enter. With Angeline and Paula's usual routine of visiting May, they told him that the general wanted to talk. As Mark had no problems with it, he left after lunch and wore his usual mask. When the personnel in the lobby saw Mark, they immediately guided him even if it was not needed. They also informed the general that he was already here. Nevertheless, Mark was not led into the office he knew but another room not far from it. "General, the visitor is here." The soldier that accompanied Mark knocked on the door. "Let him in." The voice of the general could be heard. Hearing that, the soldier opened the door and let Mark enter before leaving. A long table in the middle, quite a number of chairs and a whiteboard at the back. This was not an office but more of a conference room. Inside the room, there were several people present. Of course, he was not surprised as he already detected their mental fluctuations even before he entered the building. He was quite unsure why they were here though. Nevertheless, the reason why the general called him might be because of these people. Aside from the general, there was Professor Isaac Company, Nia, Alan, Captain Della Rosa, and Major Lopez. Unexpectedly, 4 more people were here. They were Rosami, Amika, Mikio and Professor Shervil Sandoval. "Surprise! You didn't expect that we're here, right?" Amika cheerfully shouted before anyone could even say anything. This caused everyone in the room to look at her while feeling awkward. "Amika, mind your manners." Rosami reprimanded her daughter. The green-haired girl covered her mouth, but her expression made everyone doubt whether she was listening to her mother. On the other hand, Mark ignored her antics and turned to the general. "Hey uncle. Don't IMFMPH." Amika was displeased being ignored and wanted to complain, but several tree root-like vines twirled around her face covering her mouth. Unlike the boisterous Amika, her younger brother was more mature and understanding. "I'm sorry about this." Rosami apologized with exasperation. Nobody inside the room had problems with it. It seemed that they were already used to seeing her behavior. In the least, her antics were still acceptable as a child. As for the other, the general, Nia, and Alan looked at the unsuspecting Professor County while slightly shaking their heads. "So, why did you call me here?" Mark asked the general. "Please, take a seat first." The general replied. Mark took the seat and the general finally spoke. "Our settlement, no, not only Bay City settlement, even the Quezon settlement are already buried in debts to you and your group." That statement made the other 2 military officers nod. Not only that, but General Perez and Captain Della Rosa also had personal debts to Mark. "Still, we needed your help once more." The general continued. "We had a mission for you and your group." Hearing that, Mark frowned. As he already finished with what he needed to do here, they would be leaving in a few days. He had no extra time to deal with military troubles. The general should already know that. Seeing that frown, the general was not disheartened. He looked at Professor Isaac to continue. "Don't blame Miguel. This request came from me," the professor said, making Mark turn to him. Actually, what we wanted you to do will not deviate from your current goals and schedule. He then turned to Sherville. As you know, Sherville is our best botanist here in Bay City. He even successfully researched and created the new variant of rice which could address a percentage of food shortage we had in another month or two. As the professor said that, Sherville nodded while Amika was looking proud of her uncle Sherville. Her proud look, however, was obscured by the tree roots covering half of her face. There is a problem, however. The professor continued. Since this settlement is surrounded by the Manila Bay in the west and infected cities on the other sides, we are wasting his talent. Sherville looked down. While he did not want to voice it, it was true. His specimens for research were lacking and there were not enough places here in Bay City to test his research. As a botanist, his research was about flora, something that this settlement could not provide. I see. Mark spoke. You want me to bring them to Quezon, is that it? Since the mission was about Sherville and the professor said that it would not deviate from his goals, it could be the only possible explanation. It's good that we didn't have to go further into detail. The general smiled. Also, we already know that you work like a mercenary. If you accept the mission, we will give you these. The general nodded at Nia, who took out a suitcase onto the table and opened it. Inside the suitcase, 10 fruits could be seen. Of course, he recognized those fruits and could not help but look at Mikio. So, it's true that you know about it. Professor Isaac spoke. It is one of our research we don't normally disclose to others. Like the things about neo-humans. Hearing that, Mark looked at Nia, who hung her head low. Don't be angry at her. The professor shook his head. She did not say anything, but it is not hard to know what happened when she led you and Miss May into the restricted area after the checkup of a baby you brought. There are also surveillance cameras there and the soldiers and personnel on guard will report to us. Don't be a bad influence on Nia, she actually tried to lie. But you know, she is really bad at that. Then, the professor continued. I still don't know why you get to find the good stuff here in the apocalypse. That last sentence was more of a grumble due to envy rather than a lecture. Of course, as they had to stop the professor from saying too much, the general asked. Are you willing to do it? Can I see those first? Mark asked while pointing at the golden fruits. As they had no problems with it, the suitcase was pushed in front of Mark. These had pale color compared to the one I saw, he spoke. We are aware of that. However, we can't make a child do something dangerous and recreate the scenario we heard of. The professor spoke. That's different from what I expect you to say. Mark said. There was no doubt that this guy was lying. All right. The little boy is a relative of someone important, what else can I do? That statement made Sherville, Rosemi, and Amika glared at the professor. However, the professor did not seem to care about their expression. He was really a nutcase if it came to research. We can also give you papers about those fruits. Anything else you want to ask? The general blocked the professor from speaking once more. How many soldiers will be participating? Mark asked. 1 platoon. That should be more than enough since I don't think there would be much danger if your group were to accept this mission. However, since it will be a one-way trip, the families of some of the soldiers will be coming. Don't worry about their vehicles and supply, those will be provided by us. Hearing that, for sure, it might be around 100 people, just the soldiers' families alone. However, there was no need to reject this mission. There was no deviation in his journey plans aside from bringing more people. I will accept this with one condition aside from the reward. Mark spoke after thinking a bit. What is it? I want full authority over the soldiers participating. I can't have them ruin things just because they have other plans. Hearing that, the general nodded. I will brief them about it. We only needed to finalize the date of departure. Mark started to ponder about it. He never really set a specific date since he was used to having scheduled plans being disrupted when the time came. How about 4 days later? Mark decided. That should be fine. We will have 3 more days to prepare. It should be more than enough. As the decision was made, Mark shook hands with the military officers and the professor. It was not like he wanted to. Since the meeting about the mission was finished, Mark decided to leave. Rosamie's family was the same, as they had no further business here. As for the remaining ones, they were left as they still had things to discuss. "We will be in your care again," Rosamie spoke to Mark. "Seems like it," Mark replied. "Sir, Mark. Sorry for the inconvenience." Chervil said. "It's fine. I'm getting paid for this. It's not like there are many changes too." On the other hand, Emika was grinning after she was released by Mikio that Rosamie currently carried on her arms. "What's with that look?" Mark asked. After all, she was grinning while looking at Mark. "Scary uncle, you can't escape from me. Gale and Iola are my friends, but you wanted to take them away." "That's not my problem though." Mark shook her statement nonchalantly. "As I said, you can't escape." She jumped forward trying to grab Mark and hug his waist. But she caught nothing and almost fell. "Actually, I can." Mark appeared behind her with a puff of black mist and whispered. Ignoring the fact that he appeared behind her, Emika swiftly turned around and tried to grab him once more. Like before, she caught nothing. This time, Mark appeared several steps in front. "Ahhhh, don't run away." Emika started to chase him. Nevertheless, she became tired shortly and stopped while panting. "I'll be going first. I still have things to do." Mark appeared in front of the surprised Rosamie and Chervil and gave a high five towards Mikio. "Sorry about my daughter." Rosamie voiced out exasperated. "It's fine." With that, Mark vanished from their sight just as Emika tried to sneak on him. "Arg! Scary uncle. Stop cheating." "Ow!" Emika yelled out loud, which disturbed everyone around. As Rosamie could not hold her temper anymore, she knocked on the green-haired girl's head. Day 66 to 6:22 a.m. South Gate, South District, Bay City Settlement, Para plus or minus Aqua City, Metro Manila. 4 days passed in the blink of an eye. These days were rather uneventful except for a few battles at the eastern walls. It was a common occurrence as the walls there were not separated from the mainland with trenches, unlike the other sides of the settlement. Furthermore, it would be very long before such encounters stopped. It was because of Metro Manila alone had millions in terms of the population before the outbreak. Furthermore, the wave of infected returning from the coasts increased that number. Mark and his group also raided several of the nearest untouched food establishments to gather the supplies they needed for travel. Although they could ask the military and trade Mutagen stones for supplies, Mark would rather not. It might not be too soon, but with the large population of Bay City Settlement, they would surely experience a shortage. Since the military governing the Bay City Settlement had treated his people well, he did not want to contribute to the cause of their future struggles. Today was the scheduled day. With everything prepared and things to do had been done, it was now time to leave. At the preparation area near the southern gates, several vehicles gathered. Most were modified military vehicles, but the most eye-catching were two odd futuristic-looking vehicles along with several oddly modified cars. The Exceed personnel carrier was already known by many. However, everyone was shocked seeing the completed Exceed Disintegrator Fortress. It looked like a huge metal monster packed with weapons. They also saw Amy test the slots dedicated to her tentacles that made it even scarier. Aside from those two vehicles, there were also supposed to be normal vehicles before. Now, these vehicles had attachments that were never there before. Normally, the military vehicles were the ones that looked intimidating. This time, their vehicles were overshadowed, heavily overshadowed. There was also Giffer and Chaflar. For some reason, the soldiers felt small. Nevertheless, there was a good advantage to this. It would be very unlikely for raiders to target them. The news was not heavily circulated to the public, but the military and survivor groups had encounters with armed enemies once in a while. Very much like Gifre's group. This event had not been announced. However, it seemed that the presence of Mark's group and the military's higher officers in one place attracted onlookers. Inside the preparation building, Mark was together with General Perez, Major Lopez, and Captain Della Rosa. There was also the person that would lead the soldiers, First Lieutenant Enrico Baller. They were doing the final discussion about the route they would take to Marcos Highway. Going through C6 might be the best idea, the general said. As Mark had prepared before internet services were cut off, he had a full map of the Philippines, especially Luzon, in his device. Even the military requested a copy as they had not thought of preparing one. All they had were normal maps that did not even have satellite images. Although the satellite images on Mark's application might not be too well updated, it was still a better reference than a blank map that only showed the roads. They were currently using the application to determine the routes, and Mark had several routes in the proposal. The C6 or Circumferential Road 6 they were currently talking about was the same road Colleen and Edsel took while riding on Schaffler's back. Since they had seen the road, they knew it better even just by memory. Furthermore, as the east side of C6 was facing Laguna Lake, the only threat they should expect would be coming from the west side of the road. Of course, there was still the possibility of attacks coming from the lake, but it was uncertain. From there, they would enter Taytay and Antipolo, Rizal, before they get to Marikina and Fanta Highway. This was the route they all agreed to take. It proposed the roads with less risk compared to others. There were still populated areas among the roadside, but it could not be compared to what they could encounter when traveling through several highly infested cities. So, the last thing is the possible resting points. Major Lopez spoke. Since the final route had been decided, the only thing left was the resting points. Like what happened to Mark when they had to travel to the University of Perpetual Help, they had to spend the night there. It was because, unlike before the apocalypse, the roads now were longer to traverse because of the blockades. Those blockades could either be barricades or the infected. If the worst came, even humans could block them. In any case, they needed to choose where they could camp if they took too much time on the road. The final meeting did not take long and the directions were circulated among the members, especially the soldiers. As Mark went out of the tent, a woman hugged him. "Dude, be careful on the way." Mark shrugged. This woman was no other than Karen, his college classmate, and could be said as both good and bad influence on him. The person he also viewed as an older sister. These past days, except for preparing, he spent time with his friends. He was not able to before since he had a lot of things to do. Beside Karen, Markran tapped his shoulder. Together with the two was Saime. In college, the four of them were a group. Not a normal group, but a weird group with weird personalities. The main reason Mark became an otaku was because of this group. I know. Mark answered as he escaped from her embrace. Before, he quite liked being embraced by her. However, this woman was already a married one. Yet, she never changed this habit of hugging Mark. She never did that to others though for some reason. Aside from the three, the others that would stay were also here to bid their farewell. Like Mark had expected, only those that had positive feedback when he told them about leaving decided to come with him. Most of them would stay, hoping that their families managed to survive. Roland, Nikki, Mara, and Daniel, even the little Dorothy, were saying their farewell to the other two members of their group. It was the same for Arvy's group, as also two of their members would stay behind. Because of this, the ones staying on these two groups decided to form a new one. "Sir," won the side. Edward's voice could be heard as he saluted to General Perez and Major Lopez. Captain Della Rosa even gave him a brotherly embrace. As it appeared, they were all in one platoon when the accident happened on Edward. Seeing their comrades still alive made the officers happy. Now, however, Edward had to leave once more as he was recruited by Mark. "You better take care of your partner. She might have gone through bad experiences, but life is not over." The general tapped Edward's shoulder. "Yes, sir, asterisk. The farewells had been made and the ones leaving started to board their vehicles. "Emika, where are you going?" Rosami caught her daughter that was trying to slip away. As the most important people here, it was decided that they would board Mark's vehicle that was the most secure one. Then, while the Exceed disintegrator fortress, led the way in the Exceed personnel carrier. Along with the other vehicles behind it, the soldiers would be distributed around the convoy. It was to ensure that the non-combatants would be protected. However, it seemed that Emika had no interest to board the designated vehicle. "I want to ride on that too," she shouted while pointing in a direction. In that direction, Mark could be seen sitting on Schaffler's back. Of course, who would not want to be able to ride on the back of a dragon? Even so, Rosemi would not let her. "No, that will be dangerous." "But I want to." Emika looked dejected. It was fortunate that while this girl was hard-headed, she was not the type to throw an unsightly tantrum. Unexpectedly, Mark appeared in front of them. "She wants to ride with me?" Mark asked Rosemi. I want to." Emika did not even let her mother answer the question. "All right." Mark nodded, which made the green-haired girl jump in delight. "Will it be fine? It's not dangerous, right? Also, won't she be a bother?" Rosemi worriedly asked. Although she was happy to see her daughter lively, she did not want to bother other people. "Don't worry. She'll change her mind after an hour or probably less." With those words, Rosemi nodded. She could not understand why Mark seemed certain about it, but she did not bother to think anymore. She just said strict things to her daughter before Mark brought her away. As Emika climbed up the dragon's back with Mark's help, she happily waved at Abigail, Iola, and Miracle that was entering the vehicle. She was so hard-headed and dense that she did not even realize that the three girls were staring daggers at her. Mark, on the other hand, really did not mind it. The emotional fluctuation in the settlement was always negative. Being able to absorb something positive was better. Furthermore, Mark was certain that Emika would change her mind about riding on Schaffler's back. Riding on horseback was hard, not to mention the back of a dragon. Riding horses were trained and were more tolerant of its riders. Schaffler, on the other hand, was not. It might be better if they were going to fly, but they would travel on land. In a short while, Emika's bottom would start to hurt. At that time, even if she complained, Mark would not let her go down immediately. Mark really liked to joke around with this girl. After everyone was prepared, the bridge outside lowered and the gate opened. There, 15 vehicles and 2 monsters drove out of Bay City settlement while being witnessed many people. Led by the general, the soldiers all saluted. Of course, the gallery still wondered what was going on, as none of the soldiers they asked wanted to answer their questions. "There goes the most powerful force in this settlement," Major Lopez bitterly sighed. Not that Mark and his Team Fairy were gone. Things would be harder in this settlement. They just wished that another king type would not appear until they were ready. "It can't be helped. They might be citizens in our country, but we can't say anything when the highest ones in the government abandoned everyone." General Perez sighed. Hearing that, the 2 officers looked down. It was a secret to the public. The upper house had abandoned the rest. Those senators that did not make it were the ones distributed to settlements for the military to not gain too much power. Of course, some of those senators were also not aware of this. People like Senator Estrada. As for the upper house, the Senate, they already locked themselves away from the surface, inside the Soul Apocalypse bunker built in the Philippines. "In any case, what are you going to do these things he gave us?" Captain Della Rosa spoke as he held something in his hand. Although he held it, he was making sure that none other than the general and the major saw it. The thing on his hand, it was nothing else but a physical crystal. Furthermore, it was something that contained a mutation. As Mark needed the military to support the friends he left here, he gave a crystal to a few individuals he knew in the military. The general was the luckiest one, as his family was given one for each member. However, Mark did not say what it was, but only said what to do with it. "I don't know what this is, but I have a suspicion," the major said, which the 2 also understood. Mark would surely not do anything to harm them, as his friends needed their support. Because of that, these crystals could only mean one thing. A few days later, a shocking thing was leaked to the public. Several mutators suddenly appeared within the military, and those that were left behind from the Team Fairies group were revealed to be mutators. Aside from them, other individuals were also suspected to hold such abilities. There was also a senator and his wife that suddenly became mutators despite their current reclusive state. And thus, the VIPs of the settlement wept. At the Shao residence, the things they had were scattered on the floor as the head of the family rampaged. As his family gave up contacting him at the last minute. If they did not, they believed that they would also be included. The common populace might not be able to, but those at the top could investigate. It was when they found out, all of the mutators suddenly appearing had a single similarity. Every single one of them had contact with the leader of Team Fairy, the black-armored devil, Mark.